EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome in, everybody. A Monday edition of Birds 365. The first off-season work, or I guess the middle of off-season work, is officially behind us, and the Birds are in a lull period. The first really one of the off-season now after the draft, waiting on official training camp. Johnny Mac, how was your weekend, man?
It was good. Yeah. A little bit of a respite, chance to breathe a little bit after a big mini camp week. And now it's, the grind doesn't stop for us.
Yeah, you guys ramped up quick last week. It was like an in-season week last week with you guys going down to NovaCare every day and stuff like that.
Yeah. First mini camp, obviously, in the Nick Sirianni era, which we talked a lot about. And yeah, it's a lot more fun when there's a mini camp. There's a bunch of mini camps going around the NFL. This will be the last week. Most teams are having their mini camps this week around the league. So you're going to see some information coming out of other teams. But the Eagles are done for the spring, and they'll pick up in training camp, which will be late July, probably a week earlier this week. Not official, but most likely a week earlier because they have the early start, September 6th against Green Bay in Brazil. So I project it to be a little bit earlier than normal, July 27th, 28th. So you'd probably kick it back a week.
Yep. So there you go. Late July is when we'll see the Eagles again. So we got about a 6 to 7 week period here where the Eagles won't be on. They'll be away. And as Jalen Hurts said, he'll be doing non-football stuff. Wouldn't tell us what that would be, but they will be doing their non-football stuff. Yeah, getting away from the game. So we got a good show planned. We got Jeff Kerr coming up at 8:20, so about 15 minutes from now. Johnny Mac and I will recap what went on last week and a little bit just put our final touches on what Johnny Mac took away from the mini camp. And then I have I do want to get into the Jalen Hurts, Nick Sirianni topic, just because everybody's been talking a lot about this, the comments that Jalen made regarding Nick Sirianni. So we will talk about that a little bit in hour number 2 after Jeff Kerr. But John, let's get into the Eagle news. On Friday when the show broke, after the Eagles signed another cornerback, another defensive back, Perry Nickerson. You kind of predicted that on the show that he was having a good mini camp. He was talking to Nick Sirianni a little bit. What do you make of Perry, and what did you see from him down at mini camp?
Yeah, veteran guy. He's played a little bit, bounced around, obviously a journeyman. It was interesting from the start that he got a lot of reps at slot cornerback with the third team, which, the Eagles have plenty of bodies at this time of year. So it was notable how quickly they threw him in the mix, despite the fact that he was a tryout player and he performed well. So no surprise. You want to reward guys like that. The Eagles had a couple open spots, but it is interesting simply because they have so many cornerbacks.
It's the one spot we've been like, they're so deep, and they
have 14, and you can argue they have more than that because we're putting people like Mekhi Gardner at safety, who's really a cornerback moving to safety. So they have so many defensive backs. Yeah, it's obviously a long shot that he makes the team, but wouldn't shock me if he was one of those veteran practice squad guys because he's an NFL player. We talk about the Eagles have so many NFL players at cornerback. They're going to have to cut some guys that belong in the league, so to speak. Not saying top tier, not saying they should play, and this is one of them. This guy's been around. He's played for a bunch of different teams. Played for Vic Fangio last year in Miami. So that's part of it.
Finally, a Miami Dolphin player who's okay with Vic Fangio.
Yeah, that's part of it as well. So I think there's a lot of Miami players that were fine with Vic Fangio. It's basically the defensive backs who like to play press coverage. That's who doesn't like Vic Fangio. And Jalen Ramsey being the most notable. Jalen Ramsey's going to the Hall of Fame one day. And he might be the best press corner of his generation. And he didn't like it. So what? People got to move on from that. Yeah, it's understandable why he didn't like it. And it's understandable why other people do like it. And that's just the way it's always going to be.
Agreed. Johnny Mac, I have 3 takeaways And we'll just do this real quick, a little bit of a recap. But before I do that, let me welcome everybody in this morning. Jeff Martin, what's going on, man? B-Mo, CZ, Twiz, James Carver, Little G Griffith. I don't see SMD Eagles, but I do see all of our other guys. So Eagles, Lee Butcher. What's going on, Screwface? What's going on, everybody? Welcome into Birds 365. We got some funny names in the chat, but hey, look, I read them what they are. Sometimes I get caught off guard by some of the names, but we appreciate you all being here. If you guys like the show, make sure you drop a like on the show. We do appreciate your guys' presence each and every single day. John, I'm going to recap. I want to give you 3 recaps I took away from our shows last week from the Eagles being on the field. One of them, the first one is the defense has a chance to be better than we expected. I'm not saying they're going to be, but from what they've shown so far, they have a chance to be better than we expected. On the contrary, the offense has a chance to be worse than we're expecting. I don't think they're going to be also, but I will say they have a chance to be worse depending on how it plays out. And then the third thing I'll take away is that I am concerned about the head coach of the football team. I'm not concerned about much on this football team. I am concerned about the head coach. Those were my 3 takeaways from the Eagles minicamp. I know you wrote a little bit about the offense, about the offensive line. If you could give me a couple takeaways, you don't have to give me 3 or anything, but just a couple takeaways that you had, and you can also dive into the offense and what you wrote about them. I know a lot of people made a big stink about them kind of stinking up minicamp, and it doesn't mean much.
Yeah, and I'm in that category but maybe the difference is I try it as best as possible to put all the context out there, and it affects both sides of the ball. So this is the major one from my perspective, and this is the most important one. And I go back. I really like Bobby King a lot, the new linebackers coach, because he's no nonsense. You can tell he's just not care what people think kind of guy. I respect that. And he, said we're in pajamas, which I love. I love that quote. And it's on both sides of the ball. So if you take it from the aspect, I say it all the time. People get caught up in skill position players. I get it. I understand it. Those are the headliners. That's what everybody wants. That's what everybody likes. And those are the guys that are working the most in spring, or at least working the most when it's valuable. Where the offensive line and defensive front, running back, linebackers, when it's not involving pass coverage as well, or the passing game as well, it's not as valuable for them spring work. You're not allowed to do things. Obviously, you don't have pads on, so the physicality is ramped way down. And generally, they're not even on the field, the offensive lineman, defensive front. And when they are on the field, you heard a lot about Bryce Huff dropping into coverage or Nolan Smith dropping into coverage. That's what they're practicing. They're practicing coverage, being a flat defender. They're not practicing pass rushing other than the individual drills, the technique work, which is important, but that's sort of hard to gauge, obviously, from other than the guys working them, like Jeff Stoutland, Jeremiah Washburn, etc. So I bring up all that to bring up the fact you have to realize that until that offensive line gets out there. And the Eagles are going to have a very good offensive line. It's a matter of how good. But you still have Lane Johnson. You still have Jordan Mailata. You still have Landon Dickerson. And everybody's seems to be of no worry that Cam Jurgens is going to be a very good NFL center.
Yeah,
not saying he's going to
getting to that point as well, just for what it's worth.
Not saying he's going to be Jason Kelsey.
Did about him. When I hear Jeff Stoutland though talk about him like he did, and he had more concern about him last year at guard, and I thought he was a good guard last year. I thought he did
Pro Bowl. He was a Pro Bowl when he was out, which is and he held up. But Stout, as you mentioned, said he didn't know if he could play guard. He knows he can play center.
Yeah,
and then we have to figure out what they're going to do at right guard, whether it's going to be Tyler Steen, Mekhi Becton, or somebody else. But overall, when you compare it to the rest of the league, there might be a couple teams, Detroit certainly in the conversation, Kansas City's always in the conversation, it seems, and a couple others. for having top 5 offensive line, but the Eagles are going to be in that group. So the minute those guys are relevant and those guys are on the field, it becomes way more difficult for the defense, way more difficult in practice and in theory, obviously down the road for opponents. So right now, the defense looked great in the spring and everybody's excited. But if you think about it, there's no play action. And that's one big aspect, not one, that is the biggest aspect of Kellen Moore's offense. So you don't have those false steps from linebackers. That's been an issue with Devin White in Tampa.
Right.
He knows the running game's not coming, so he can sit back in coverage and show up his athleticism, and everybody gets excited. So it works both ways. Defense looks good in this environment because they got a bunch of young athletic players who can show off. And then if you can project down the road offensively, all of a sudden, when the offensive line is there, again, you have RPOs, you have play action, you're putting defenders in conflict, you have double moves from the receivers. All this stuff comes in the equation. The bunch formations that Kellen Moore wants to use to free up Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All this comes into the equation when the offensive line gets on the field consistently. And then I think you'll see the Eagles' offense ramp up. That's not to say give them an excuse because 7-on-7 drills are still geared for the offense, and they look bad at times, the first team. And that wasn't the case with the second and third team at times. Tanner McKee probably had 4 out of 5 good practices as the third team quarterback, had one bad one. Kenny Pickett was up and down, but he made a bunch of back shoulder throws that were pretty impressive. So I don't want to downplay the lack of productivity from the first team offense. They should have done better, but maybe that's simply explained by 95% new offense, as Jalen Hurts said. So this isn't about meshing together 2 offenses. It's about Kellen Moore's completely new offense.
Yeah, and there's always so much context, Johnny Mac, and you always bring it to this show. Just everything you just said. It's basically impossible to gauge whether the defense is going to be good or whether the offense is going to be bad from these type of practices. There's offensive lines, there's plays, there's teams, there's instincts, like you said. So, and I would also add in the identity of this football team for many years now has been the lines, both on both sides of the ball, offensive
by
and
design.
defensive line.
By design.
Yeah, by design. I mean, they build from the inside out. They've been very vocal about that. They've been very clear about that. They put a lot of stock in those positions, and they're not really a part of this. So it's tough to gauge, whether they're going to be great or not. But I will say, I agree with you on the offense. I think it's mostly to the Kellen Moore, to the 95% new. So we'll see how they come along in camp. Johnny Mac, any big winners or losers from camp for you, specifically talking about players? If I went loser, I'd have to go Nakobe Dean. I know you guys are telling me he's still going to be the guy and he's coming back from the injury. So I don't want to go declare him a loser. I'm just saying it seems like that position, they're starting to settle in with Devin White and Zach Baum, which could spell trouble for Nakobe Dean. Maybe not, but seems like that could be a possibility. And for a winner, I'd go Devin White on the flip side at linebacker, or even Mekhi Becton playing some guard. I didn't expect him to play guard. He could be a guy that maybe if he plays guard could get a contract here, but those are just 2 off the top of my head. Who do you have?
Loser, I'm going to go off the radar a little bit and say Matt Hennessy, because I thought he had a chance to push Tyler Steen potentially for the starting right guard spot. And I thought it was interesting right away. He was getting the second team reps at right guard instead of playing backup center, because he would also be the interior backup in theory at center on game day. And then all of a sudden they're playing, as you mentioned, Mekhi Becton at guard when Landon Nickerson is excused. Now, other side, and Mekhi himself said he's a natural left tackle. And he was asked, what's more difficult, moving from left tackle, left guard, or moving from left tackle to right tackle, which he played last year with the Jets quite a bit. And he said moving sides was more difficult for him. So I can't just pluck him in at right guard because he's not nearly as comfortable on that side of the football. So I would say Matt, sort of off the radar. I don't think I with Nickerson. He said they just put him back in the lineup. I got to wait on that. You may be right, but he's not. He's just coming off a very serious list spring surgery. They're mixing him in. They're sticking his toes in the water, so to speak. If it shows up, because he's going to be fully cleared by July, late July in training camp. If they show up and it's still Devin White and Zach Bond as the starting linebackers, I'll start to entertain that more. But until that happens, I'm going to default to Nickerson, so I can't go there. And as far as winners, you can pick any of the young cornerbacks. I mean,
Yeah, that's
Rogers, true. Ringo, Mitchell, Cooper, DeJean, they were all pretty impressive in their first sort of bout of NFL action. And they all look good. With all that context I added in, remember, no offensive line. They're playing covers. They're jumping routes. They're comfortable. They're practicing technique. And I think, Big's trying to build up some confidence as well. So I think Vic Fangio was enjoying that. Said, balls to the wall. You don't got to worry about the run game. Just go jump routes and maybe get some confidence for these younger players. I think that factored into it as well.
Yeah, my loser for Nickerson Dean honestly probably had less to do with Nickerson Dean and more to do with, is there a chance he gets Wally pipped where, you're riding Pine so much, eventually the team has to look in another direction.
There's a possibility. There's a possibility.
Zach Bond is stepping up. It's going to be hard to take a guy off the field who's producing. Now, let's see if he actually does produce. But my loser would have to be doing more with that probably than
Wally Pipp exists if people know who that is. But,
the only reason I know who that is because of you, Johnny Mac. I'm from producing the show for years. I know
everybody should know. Well, look up Wally Pipp. If everybody doesn't know the story, you should know it. PIPP. But he was the Yankees' first baseman before Lou Gehrig. He got hurt, and then bang, 2000, however many games later. So it happens, but generally people default to the starter. And the Eagles love Nickerson Dean's football IQ. And I really think they want him to be the middle linebacker because of his instincts and his ability to call the defense. And they want him to be the green dot. And I've got no indication that's not the case anymore. Maybe he can't handle it physically. That's a possibility. Maybe they can't trust him to stay on the field. That's a possibility. But until I see it, and he's cleared and they're going in a different direction, I'm not going to believe it until then.
Fair enough, Johnny Mac. Let's get to our first break. We'll have Jeff Kerr coming up. It'll be good to talk to Jeff Kerr, see what his perspective is, add some insight to the conversation. I have some great topics for hour number 2, so I'm excited for hour number 2. But coming up next, Jeff Kerr joins us on Bird 365. Stay tuned, everybody.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.
Field of life, First Trust Bank is there for you. Champions on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Because Philadelphia dreams deserve a Philadelphia bank.
Heading down the shore. Have a ball once more.
Here, imaginations run wild and time stands still. Because here, you can find the best of the Jersey Shore, all on one 5-mile island. So leave the old you behind and get lost in the woods.
Wild, wild, wildwood day.
Plan your stay in the Wildwoods today.
Hi, I'm Jim Muehlbronner, Managing Partner at Delval Insurance Group. Give us a call. We're a local, knowledgeable agency, not an 800 number. Go Birds!
The greatest fans on earth. It's a bold statement, but would you expect anything less from Philadelphia? 58 years of heartache creates a toughness, a grit, a resolve not found in most. Sure, our prayers were answered, but now that we've had a taste, we're looking for more. Pondley Hockey, official partner of the Philadelphia Eagles. EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome back in, everybody, to Monday's edition of Birds 365. June 10th, moving right along in the NFL offseason, joined now by Jeff Kerr from CBS Sports. Jeff, what's going on, man? How you doing this Monday?
Should I get John McMullen fired up now, or should I wait 5 minutes?
Get him fired up, Jeff.
Go ahead. Go.
So apparently Darius Slay said the Eagles aren't wearing Kelly Green uniforms this year.
Oh, what a devastating blow. Devastating. I didn't see Slay.
You don't care about uniforms. Are you
shockingly, I didn't ask Slay what uniforms they were wearing. Shockingly.
That's your favorite topic, that and jersey numbers.
You're telling me they brought back the Kelly Greens for a single season? They made that stink for a single season?
They have the right to do that. I mean,
I know they have the right to do it. I'm just questioning.
Jeff's a uniform guy. This is all Jeff. I have no information.
I have to ask around, but
they have so many uniform rules. It's absurd. Now they've liberalized them. Now, and by the way, I will say I'm surprised it's taken the NFL this long to make all these alternate jerseys, alternate helmets. Do like Oregon. I'm surprised teams don't wear a different uniform every day by this point.
See,
if there's a buck to be made, they try to make it.
This is what shocks me. Like, you bring it back, you're already selling Kelly Green, Saquon Barkley jerseys. You would think they're wearing them this year.
The cash register must have slowed on the Kelly Green, and they said, all right, let's go back.
I don't think it has slowed. That's probably part of the strategy is keep it rare, so when it does pop up,
everybody goes crazy for it.
What I need to figure out is, in the NFL, they're good at getting back to me on stuff like this. They are approving a second alternate helmet. It's just when are they doing it? So the black helmets will be coming back soon.
Well, the Vikings put out their Winter Wonderland goofy all white uniforms last week. They sent out that press release, so they have a different helmet. I don't understand.
And it's weird too because they came out with a throwback last year. Is their throwback gone?
Yeah, I don't get
I wonder if the Kelly Green has anything to do with the Brazil game, Jeff. I mean, we saw that thing that Josh Jacobs was saying. I know the NFL kind of came out and disputed it, but
nonsense.
Hey, Josh still said it. I don't know if they're
well, that's because. But where did that start? I did read somebody.
You know what? You can blame me for that. I wrote something about that like 3 months ago because there was talk about they might not be able to wear green because of the Corinthians thing, and I'm like, I don't think this is really gonna. I even put like at the end, I don't even think this is gonna be the case. But it is funny how there's 3 teams that their primary uniform is green, and the NFL picked 2 of them.
Yeah, they probably didn't realize, but you know, there's all these rumors about, you know, this, and you're going to get attacked if you wear green, and this or that, blah blah blah. It's not the case, and everybody's going to be fine, and you can wear your green jersey, and everybody's going to wear their green jerseys, and the people of Brazil aren't going to say, "Oh, you're disrespecting my soccer team or this soccer team or football, whatever they call it." But yeah. I wouldn't worry about it.
I wouldn't hear it. I mean, it was a fun story, and the NFL definitely shot it down like the second they could.
They should have. They should have. I did read where it started. Somebody made a flippant comment, and all of a sudden it becomes a thing. Sort of like AJ Brown's going to get traded locally. You know, somebody does a poll, and all of a sudden it becomes a national story. I think that's similar, just to a larger level. It was some goofy comment, and then it just exploded. So the NFL's kind of shot that down. Yeah. Nobody's worried about wearing green. Somebody's going to wear green. I don't know if it's Eagles, Packers. I don't know. And technically, the Eagles are the home team, so they get the decision. I believe that's still the rule, right?
And in theory, like, they could have avoided all of it too. Like, there was a way to get a loophole with the whole teams wearing green.
They could have picked Cleveland.
They could have.
Yeah. There you go. Problem solved.
The Eagles could have wore black, and the Packers could have wore their throwbacks.
Yeah. Well,
Packers is a better game there for the NFL. They got the two young up and coming.
Not the better game for the Eagles.
Not the better game for the Eagles, but for the NFL, they're selling tickets, ratings, revenue, all sorts of things. This is a good NFC matchup. 2 young quarterbacks who are breaking out.
I'm surprised Jeffrey Lurie didn't push back on that more. I'll be honest, but hey, maybe selling the stake in the team. Did we talk about that, by the way?
Have we talked about that?
We didn't talk about it with Jeff Kerr. We did talk about it on Friday, Johnny Mac. But Jeff, what's your takeaway on that?
Yeah.
I mean, there's this whole provision thing in the NFL now where I got to read the whole details of, but a couple teams are going to be doing this where you can kind of sell a minority stake in the team, like 5-10%. And, you know, I know a couple teams are interested in doing that. I think the Bills and the Dolphins were 2 other teams that are contemplating doing it. So, I mean, if it's a chance for Rob McElhenney or Bradley Cooper, or, I mean, I said to McMullen here, John Middleton should buy a minority stake.
Well, he could. That's the problem. I mean, well, Jeffrey. So I did that. Jeffrey bought the team for 190 something million.
195 million. It was.
Yeah, back in '94, I think it was. So even if you do that inflation adjusted, it's just a little bit, 410 million or so, somewhere in that range. And the valuation is 7.5 billion now. But I think a lot of people don't understand that's not liquidity. So basically, if you sell 10% at a 7.5 billion evaluation, you make 750 million, and that almost doubles your original investment, and you still got total control of your team. So that's what it's about. And the NFL had to liberalize the the rules a little bit for the Washington Commanders purchase because it was so much money. So Josh Harris had to take on investors. So if he's allowed to, everybody else is allowed to. And that means they can make a boatload of money as long as you could find a really rich guy to buy in and have no power. Now, some like it because of ego, but guys like Rob McElhenney, and that'd be a cool story, Bradley Cooper, they don't have that much money. I mean,
I wonder if they open up this box, though, with the private equity, and then you have international guys and Saudis trying to buy in. I wonder if they open up. I mean, look, there's money to be made. The NFL is going to go for it.
But the NFL better be careful with the Saudis, because they have the money to do.
They can buy anything. I mean, there's going to be a game in Dubai. There's going to be one. It's just when are they going to do it?
Yeah, they can do. They could start their own league if they decided to, like they did with golf, and say, "Hey, we're going to buy all the players." NFL better be wary of that. Sounds crazy. But the beauty of the NFL, even though they're making inroads, it's not that popular as a worldwide sport, right? They're not
Yeah.
No, that's correct. Yeah, it's an American sport, football. It's not nearly as popular as many internationals.
Because nobody understands it. The rules are so arcane and so over legislated.
Our own fans don't understand the rules.
Yeah. And when you take it to a different country who's not used to it, they're like, what the hell is going on? What is this? Now they've made significant inroads in Europe, obviously, but long way to go. And they're taking the first step with Brazil, obviously, with the Eagles. And that's part of why Jeffrey Lurie didn't push back on the Packers.
Did you know this, John? Brazil's like one of the top 4 countries that watch football, American football.
Well, it's Sao Paulo is one of the biggest metropolises in the world.
Yeah,
so
ever.
So it doesn't surprise me. There's a lot of people. So it probably doesn't surprise me. They have more people than most of the other European countries. So it's not a surprise. I mean, they're going there for a reason.
Yeah, and look, I'm excited for when the league eventually tries Tokyo again, Australia. I remember watching those American Bowls. I used to kind of get excited because that was always the first game of the year. So it's like, oh, cool, you get to watch football in a different country. Now
the American Bowl.
Yeah.
I mean, I get why the NFL does it. I personally do not care at all about any of the international stuff.
It's too much of it.
I mean, I don't have a problem with them doing it. It's a business. I understand running a business. I understand generating money, boosting revenues, finding more fans. I get it all. I just don't care for it. But John, I do think you're right about the Saudis. I think that's something to keep your eye on. They bought golf. They're buying boxing now. They're buying and they got the money in the couch cushions. That's
they're in the Formula One like it's no tomorrow's.
Yeah, they are. They are. That's as well.
It's crazy, like their imprint on that, and now you got what matches.
And as a wrestling guy, they pay every time WWE goes to Saudi Arabia, they get $55 million per show. $55 million per show. It's one show. It's like everyone talks about WrestleMania. It was just in Philadelphia. It was the most successful WrestleMania financially in history. They sold out Wells Fargo Center 3 times. They sold out Lincoln Financial Field twice. They go to Saudi Arabia and make twice the money for one throwaway card just because they want them over there. They if they want something, they have the money to do it. I don't think they'll want football though. That's the good part of it.
I mean, look at Live Golf. Look at what those players are making, and it's a shame as someone who likes golf.
Yeah, me too.
Everybody kind of rips. The pundits are ripping Sky Scheffler. Oh, he's 5 wins, but he's not playing everybody. I'm like, well, that's golf's fault. That ain't Sky Scheffler's fault.
He's a felon, Jeff.
Oh yeah, yeah. Wait.
I'm joking.
Get the masses going, John.
I'm joking.
I do get sick of the self-righteous though who criticize it. And look, I get it. There's problems with Saudi money, but look at governments all over the world who are all in bed with that. Like, come on, don't try. If there's money to be made for a business, they're going to go and make the money.
That's up. Yeah, I've had that discussion many times. I mean, that's up to the U.S. government. They allow businesses to do business in Saudi Arabia. Blame the person responsible. If you allow a business to make money, they're going to try to make money. It's not their fault.
Well, capitalism.
Yeah,
exactly. That's the land of the free and the home of the brave. That's what it's built on. So, makes complete sense to me. Jeff, let's get into a lot of off-season topics, but I want to real quick go just get your takeaways from what broke down last week at minicamp. What if Jeff Kerr left minicamp thinking anything differently, better, or worse about the Philadelphia Eagles?
I'm not going to overreact to how the offense looked, especially since 9.
Come on, overreact.
No, I got my Ed Krause version of overreactions coming later this week, John. I'll get people riled up over that. But
Good.
I
We'll be looking forward to reading that one.
yeah, I mean, really, this is what's tough about evaluating guys in shorts. It's guys in shorts. Yeah, that's just my takeaway from it. I agree with John. Before I came in, if you were a defensive back on the Eagles, you had a great minicamp. It didn't matter if your name was Keely Ringo, Isaiah Rogers. I mean, the cornerback competition is going to be a lot of fun. I can't say anything about. Okay, you know what? I do have one. I think Mekhi Becton will probably be starting at guard week 1. That's just one of my overreaction takeaways. Whatever. I think the right guard could be Mekhi Becton week 1. It just seems
I agree
like,
with you.
It just seems like they're trying to force it, John. They are.
He also was very in his comments at the press conference. He was very vocal about loved Philadelphia. Seemed like he wanted to have an extended career here. Big fan of Jeff Stoutland, obviously, as most offensive linemen are. But I do think you're right. I think that's definitely a possibility, a good one.
Now, the one thing Mekhi was asked when he spoke to us, he was asked about what was more difficult, moving from left to right tackle or left tackle to left guard, because he was playing left guard, and he said moving sides was more difficult for him than moving inside from left tackle to left guard. So he's not as comfortable on the right side, so we got to see how it develops. But I think Lane Johnson let that cat out of the bag. Lane said, we got to get him on the field. And not that it's Lane's decision, but Lane is generally plugged into the way Jeff Stoutland is thinking. So I think they're trying to work towards that.
And Lane's basically Jason Kelsey now on that offensive line. He's the elder statesman.
Yeah,
it's
now,
not Lane's decision, but John, don't you think Lane would have at least some voice?
Well,
in the
that's what I.
conversation?
That's
who's
what
going to be next to him. Yeah,
that's why I think he let the cat out of the bag. Now,
yeah, right.
If Tyler Steen shows up and plays well, they're not going to take him off the field, so he still has a chance. But I'm not sure he's ready. So we'll see how it shakes out. But that'll be one of the more interesting things, and that's why, Jeff, you had your training camp sort of standouts over at CBS. Everybody should check that out. One of my losers, as I mentioned, was Matt Hennessy, because I thought he was going to be the one pushing Tyler Steen. I don't think that's the case anymore, which is tough to say. They're not even out there, but I think from how it developed, it wasn't a good sign for Matt Hennessy.
Yeah, read the tea leaves. I mean, they signed a guard with starting experience in the league, and they're playing Mekhi Becton over.
Yeah, and you're right. Good bringing up Max Sharping as well, because it's a double whammy for Matt Hennessy, and maybe he's just not healthy. It's a shame, because he was a good player in Atlanta before the injury started. But guess what? Justin Evans was a good player in Tampa before the injuries came. And Justin Evans fought through it, and people forget he was the starting safety last year, week 1, Jeff. Then
former second-round pick too, a lot of talent.
Yeah, but then he got hurt again. He played, I think, 4 games, and we never saw him again. Injuries are a big part of this league, and if he can't be on the field, people are going to turn the page pretty quickly.
By the way, John, I thought John Ross had a good week. I thought he had a good couple weeks, but I still want to say to myself, is he going to be the number 3 guy, or are they going to sign somebody? Are they going to trade for somebody?
I think they're going outside the organization. But if they don't, I think John Ross is their best alternative of the guys here right now. But I find it very hard to believe that Howie's going to stand pat there. But we'll see. I can't see anybody else beating out John Ross from what I saw. And John's been on the couch for 2 years. Now,
John's getting open.
Yeah, you could see, Howie would say, you could see the twitch in his body. He still looks like a top-tier athlete. He looked good. He looked good. He looked raw. He looked not raw. He looked rusty. There was the one pass, he had a chance to get a second foot in. He didn't get it in. I think that stuff will he'll clean that kind of stuff up. But ultimately, Nick talked about, hey, we don't have to do it with 3 receivers. We can play 2 tight ends. We can play 2 running backs to get that third receiver involved. But that's not what you want to do. They want to find a third receiver, but
run 11 personnel. I mean,
yeah.
I was just I just have a column come out for CBSSports.com on the best move NFC teams made this offseason. And one of them was the Falcons hiring Zach Robinson to be their offensive coordinator. I didn't realize how much the Rams ran 11 personnel.
All they run is 11.
Yeah, and that's all they run.
He's the king of 11.
And then I'm adding on to this, like, okay, so there's a reason why they added Darnell Mooney and Rondell Moore. Like, or they're going to put Kyle Pitts in the slot a lot more than people think. They're going to run 11 personnel, and it's going to look really good with Kirk Cousins.
Oh, my God. Play action. Sean McVay is the king of play action. Sean McVay is, 11. Yeah, Kirk's going to, if that Achilles isn't hanging, he's going to throw for 4,000 yards. You can.
He might get close to 5,000 yards.
By the way, this is how much of a freak Dan Marino was. This is why I get tired of hearing Dan Marino never won a Super Bowl. Dan Marino had an Achilles injury, I think 32, and still was able to make 2 Pro Bowls and put up not the numbers he was used to, but still put up very good numbers in his mid-30s. Meanwhile, other quarterbacks that were good but had Achilles injuries, Jim Miller's one of them, they just were never the same player.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's part of the hope with Kirk Cousins. He's not a movement-based quarterback. Either was Dan, so you don't have to worry about the mobility aspect of it. They just need functional mobility. So I think it helps those guys.
That's why I worry about Aaron Rodgers a bit, because he does run.
Yeah, he does move more than those guys, certainly.
Yeah, he'll move outside the pocket to make a big throw,
Yeah. So it's something to watch with Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, but anytime, I don't know what Kirk is, 36, somewhere in that range.
I think he's 37 now, isn't he?
Yeah. Anytime you're that old, it's got to be a concern. And Aaron's even older than that. So it's got to be a concern with him as well. But if he's healthy, and it's a big if, we talk about that, he's going to throw for a lot of yards in Atlanta. So fantasy football people get excited about that, if that's your thing. But moving it back to the Eagles quarterback, our buddy Martin Frank kicked off an awkward.
I saw it. I saw it. We were sitting next to him.
Yeah. So what, it was and I was talking to Martin about it afterwards. It was basically, and he described it so I could say, he said it was a softball, and Jalen.
It was a softball.
I mean, that was a softball. That was a new level of softball. It was a teed up softball for him.
Yeah. So it basically asked, what do you notice about Nick now that his role has changed? All right. Pretty simple. And it was this awkward long pause.
I don't have an answer.
Chuckled a little bit. And then Jalen said, I mean, that's a great question. I don't know that I know the answer to it. And, Martin kind of followed up with a little bit, well, what do you see? And then it was like, I think he's been great in another long pause. The messages he's delivering to the team, he's trying to be very intentional with what he's saying. I think Jalen was trying to be very intentional with what he was saying.
Jalen doesn't, or as you and I both know this, John, Jalen, when he wants a message out, it comes out.
Well, I asked him the first question. Well, the first relevant question.
And he tells you about 95% of the offenses new. You didn't even ask him that.
Which is another show of intentionality from him.
Exactly. That's why I was pointing it out. It's a show of his intention. He wanted it out there, and he got it out there. And so I bring that up to bring up, did he want it out there? Is there a disconnect? I know people are going to love this. I don't want a WIP poll, but is there a disconnect? And more with this sort of straddling the fence with Nick Sirianni. Are we starting to see some of the problems with that? You know, because I didn't like it. I didn't like the way Jeffrey Lurie went about Nick Sirianni. Either keep him, let him do what he wants, or don't keep him. I always say that. Said the same thing with Doug. Let him keep him, let him do what he wants, or don't keep him.
I mean, did Jalen really have a problem with the offense last year?
Yeah, he did.
And what's he complaining about?
Evidently, he's complaining about Nick more than Brian Johnson. That's my assumption. Which shouldn't be a surprise, but
yeah,
and if you're a head coach and the quarterback's not on board, you're in freaking trouble.
Yeah, you are.
You're in major trouble. That's why, John, I would dismiss that this is anywhere close to a WIP made up poll. I think this is real. I mean, you can also look back at certain instances throughout the years of their tenure, even when things were great, where Jalen just didn't like what Nick was doing, the famous Super Bowl thing where Nick has his hand in the air and Jalen's like, put your hands down. Just little. I know it's not a huge thing, but that, coupled in with what happened last year and now these comments, I don't think it looks good for Nick Sirianni. It's one of my biggest takeaways. It was one of my big takeaways from the mini camp. I don't think it looks good at all.
Jeff?
I didn't like Jalen's answer either. And, I'm thinking to myself, okay, while all this is happening, I'm like, well, Martin Frank didn't just stump Jalen Hurts. That's just the one thing.
I don't think Martin Frank had any intention of stumping Jalen Hurts. I think he teed him up a softball. Like, Jalen didn't give me Nick's a professional. Nick is working well with Kellen.
It's a pretty easy answer.
He could have.
It really is. Like if someone asked me to say, what's your relationship? What is your relationship like with John McMullen? Oh, it's great. It's awesome. That's all you have to say.
I mean, and even if you don't like John McMullen, oh, John's a professional. It's good working with him. It's not.
I get a lot of that.
It's not a hard thing to answer. And Jalen, and if you watch it too, John read it back well, but if you watch it and you hear the pauses and the smiles, it's really an interesting.
The one thing I couldn't wait for Thursday night was to listen to it again and then get a transcript from it and read that, and I'm like, oh, yeah. It's everybody thinks like this is like a fake controversy. It's not. I mean, it's concerning. I'll just say that. It's I've heard quarterbacks around the league like you don't hear Lamar saying that about John Harbaugh. You don't hear Herbert saying that about any of his coaches. I mean, he could have ripped Brandon Staley for 3 years. He's never ripped him up. At least to me, he's never ripped to anybody like that.
Well, I wouldn't say that was a rip.
Well, no, it's not a rip, but you know where I'm going with this. It's
yeah.
They even if Justin Herbert doesn't think well about Brandon Staley over the years, he never gave me any indication.
You could argue it was a rip too, by the way. When someone gives you a softball that easy for you to talk up your head coach after a collapse and you completely go the other way. You could, I'm not saying it was a deliberate rip, but you could argue the nature of it is rip-like.
Well, then, and let me add in, so Nick Sirianni spoke as well. And he spoke before, no, he spoke after Jalen. Now, he didn't hear Jalen. But he was asked about the relationship and how it's changed. And he explained he's not with him every single second of the day like he has been in the past. So he said it's about being intentional. There's that word again. But I know this, when I'm not in there every single second of every single day, that means I'm around everybody else because my relationship with Jalen is highly important. But my relationship with, and he threw out Milton Williams is highly important. My relationship with Clint Hurts is highly important. My relationship with Howie is highly important. And that's what you get when you're not so zeroed in on being with Jalen Hurts and the quarterbacks and the offense every single time of every single day. That was Nick's quote. This is not good for Nick Sirianni.
You
That's
know
my impression.
You know what
I mean-
bothers me about this whole thing, John? It just feels like it's going to be a lame duck year for Nick, no matter what they do.
Well, that's unless they win the Super Bowl. And I'm not, if they get to the Super Bowl, maybe even, a deep playoff run, whatever you describe that as. But absent that, he's a lame duck.
Which is weird to me because Jeffrey Lurie is, and we talk about it all the time, they make a lot of right decisions. For a team that has Super Bowl aspirations, for a team that goes out and signs Saquon, for a team that does what they do to try and get this team back to where they were in 22 as a Super Bowl contending team. If he was a lame duck, why bring him back? I feel like they make too many of the right decisions to do that.
Perhaps they feel the coordinators they hired are going to get him back.
Well, I do think that the coordinator relationship specifically with Jalen Hurts is more important, but the head coach is the leader of the football team. Whether he really is or not, by default, by title, he's the leader of the football team. If the quarterback's not in his corner, as Johnny Mack pointed out, that's trouble for Nick.
Did the Eagles just not get the guy they wanted?
Talking about Bill?
Yeah, I'm referring to him, but
He's still out there though. They could have had him.
Yeah. Now I just
Thanks to the tango, Zander.
Well, and he's also getting paid millions of dollars to be sitting on the beach right now by Robert Kraft.
Well, Bill was at the Brady roast saying, "Hey, could you get me in Philadelphia?"
Yeah,
I don't. Now, obviously, it's a joke, but Jeffrey Lurie has shown no proclivity. He's been here since '94. We talked about it. Think about the coaches he hired. There's no 72-year-old entrenched guys who've been doing it forever.
He doesn't hire retreads. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
No, let's go to the super chat real quick because I agree with this point. We all see, and this is contributing to our conversation here. We all see that Nick contributes nothing to this team. So why is he here? Jalen has been expressing a desire to be coached for a while.
Yeah, I'm not going to go that far.
You're not going to say Nick contributes nothing, but I will say Jalen
is getting coached right now. That's
not by Nick.
Jalen Hurts won 29 of 32 stinking games at one point with Nick Sirianni's offense. So, I mean, you can't win at that level in the National Football League and contribute nothing. So yeah, I get people's emotion when things don't go the way you expected, especially when you think, and everybody thought they were a significant Super Bowl contender again when they were 10-1, including myself, including most people. We complained about style points and all that kind of stuff, but yada, yada, yada. I'm not dismissing the collapse because it's there, it's real. But you can't tell me this guy had the greatest stretch of Eagles football in modern Eagles history and became an idiot overnight. I don't buy that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and you can't dismiss that context. Prince, we appreciate the super chat, man. Thanks for checking in. But I do, right? You're right, John. You can't just dismiss the context of a Super Bowl year, 29 or whatever the record was where they won that many games straight. I do agree, but there is a lot of signs pointing to Nick Sirianni just losing more and more and more and more.
Well, it happens. Everybody's got a shelf life.
Yeah.
And believe me, Nick knows he's on the clock. He knows.
He's got to win this year.
Yeah. And that's just life in the NFL. He understands that. But this assumption that he doesn't know football or he doesn't have a hot route in his offense, which is a high school.
He forgets more about football than probably 95%.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I don't view it as that he doesn't know football. I view it more as, is he not suited to be a head coach in the NFL? Like, he might be fantastic at teaching players in another capacity. John, you talk about it all the time. Being a head coach of an NFL team is a lot. It takes a lot. It's a lot more than knowing hot routes or knowing offense.
But he's also won winning percentage, he's the winningest head coach in Eagles history.
It's true. It's a good point. There's not much of a rebuttal to that. You know, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate of.
Well, there's plenty of things. No,
you know?
He might be, because of his personality, he might be the quintessential shooting star. You know, he runs too hot and he's going to burn out. You know, he's probably too emotional, all that kind of stuff on the sidelines. You know, you mentioned it with Jalen, you know, being the adult in the room at times.
I mean, I work with people who say Nick's got a punchable face. And keep in mind that this person is not a Giants, Cowboys, nor Commanders fan either. This is just someone from out west.
Well, you know why he's got a punchable face, Jeff? Because he was beating up on everybody, and he was willing to spike the football.
Yeah, but that's what it is. So
you know, and maybe he shouldn't do that. But I guarantee you, all these people that want to play, he's the nicest freaking guy in the world. I mean, you're gonna like him 5 seconds in.
My whole issue when people complain about, and I thought the Kansas City thing was a little too much too. I don't particularly like going after another team's fan base, but when you're when you're crushing the Giants and you're doing what you're doing, and Giants fans have an issue with that, or Giants players have an issue with that. Maybe you should, I don't know, get better and try beating them.
You know, speaking of Kansas City, I have an interesting aspect of that because were you at Arrowhead? I don't know if you were there.
I didn't go to Arrowhead last year.
It is a really cramped environment underneath Arrow. It's an older stadium. The hallways are really small.
They're trying to renovate that in the worst way.
Yeah,
right now.
I got caught in the Eagles locker room when Nick was going to do his post-game press conference, and it took me forever to try to get to the post-game press conference. And he was nice enough to because I didn't get my question in, so he was nice enough to do a walk and talk with me going back to the Eagles locker room. Now, this thing was interrupted. I kid you not, Jeff. We're talking about maybe 2 city blocks between that.
It's a long walk.
2 small city blocks, not that long, but so it was quite a while. We got stopped. I kid you not, 20 times between that walk. Not we. He got stopped when he was talking to me 20 times. From people to Kansas City coming up to congratulate him. Wow. Everybody loves him there. He used to coach there. His outburst was more about beating a team that he loves so much and beating an organization that he loves so much.
Well, I think
he met his wife there, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, the Super Bowl. But those Kansas City people freaking love the guy.
I know the organization does.
Yeah,
some people in the organization do. Not
they love them. I'm talking about the These were all Chiefs organizational people. That's who kept stopping them. That's what I'm saying. There was no. My only point of saying that there was no. I dislike the Chiefs fans. I was just really excited to beat Andy Reid and the Chiefs, and for all the obvious reasons.
Obviously, John, and again, this is why I love how you bring this up, because this is where we live in a society now where everything is optics, optics, optics. And I'm always one of those, you just got to watch what you're doing at all times. It's unfortunate, but you got to do it. Like, it's like the whole, you and I have talked about this, the whole Caitlin Clark stuff. Like anything she does or doesn't do now, or anything someone does to her is just blown up to the 1 millionth degree. It feels like that's with Nick Sirianni right now.
Yeah. But the larger point is, Jeffrey Lurie and how he set this up. And I don't like it. And I said it from day one, and it's getting, to me, when you look at Jalen's comments and you look at Nick's comments, it's just focusing down on that. I don't think this was the best setup by Jeffrey Lurie. Shit or get off the pot. If you don't want him, fire him. If you want him, let him be the head coach.
And maybe that's what Jalen's point was. What you just said. It's like, look, I don't have an issue with the guy, but you're either committed to him or you're not.
I wonder if it was a self-serving reason to keep him around, where I think they might know that the writing was on the wall with him, but how bad does it look to fire Doug 3 years after the Super Bowl, then hire a coach who goes to the
very
Super Bowl
bad
in the
luck.
second year,
Very bad
and
luck.
fire him a year later?
But it's also a bad look to start 10-1 and lose 6 of 7. It's only happened once.
But I'm saying from an organizational standpoint, if you're Jeffrey Lurie, like I just fired Doug not that long ago. I mean, it was in recent memory. Right after 3 years removed from a Super Bowl, our first ever, our only Super Bowl in franchise history, Doug raised the crown with Nick Foles over freaking Brady and Belichick. It's like David versus Goliath, and he's out the door. And now Nick goes back, and a year later he's gone. That would be a bad look. A bad look on the Eagles.
But you know what's also a bad look? A head coach who can't figure out why his team keeps losing 6 to 7, or knows the answer to why his team's losing 6 to 7. And just can't
but it's a bad look on Nick, Jeff. It's not as bad of a look on the organization. The organization's
the organization set that precedent. That's the thing. This is the one thing I will criticize about the Philadelphia Eagles. Unlike the Kansas City Chiefs, the Baltimore Ravens, these franchises that seem to figure out how to win the Eagles always have this like year or two where they just absolutely suck. Like, and I can't figure, or like last year, they didn't absolutely suck, but they absolutely sucked for 7 games. And 2020, I know it was a COVID year, but they were horrible, and the quarterback was horrible. And Doug is a good coach and couldn't figure it out. Jacksonville last year, you saw Doug's flaws with Jacksonville. They 8-3, number 1 seed in the AFC. Same time the Eagles were number 1 seed in the NFC, and they just imploded. And like, I can't figure out why the Eagles go through stretches like this. 2012 they did. Andy Reid is, I'll say it, I still say he's a better coach than Belichick, and he had a 4-12 season. But the Eagles just caved. They said, "Oh no, you're not good anymore. Time has passed." Yeah, ever since.
Well,
then.
everybody. I mean, because talent is cyclical, and if you're around long enough, you're going to have bad seasons. Even Andy's had bad seasons.
Yeah.
Andy's a great coach. And he's a great coach in good seasons. He's a great coach in bad seasons. And he's a great coach in everything in between. Yeah, I think that's the part that's missed. Look, your goal as a coach should be to maximize what you have. And sometimes you don't have enough to compete for a championship. But you might, your best coaching job, if you're around for as long as Andy Reid and you give Andy the truth serum, he might tell you his best coaching job was a 9-7 year or an 8-8 year.
Or his
maybe last year when you lose all those players, you have a tough start to the year, and then you go and you win it.
Or his first year when they were 5-11. That wasn't a 5-11 football team. He made them a 5-11 football team.
Yeah, I mean, it's you can't, if you don't have the horses, you can't win a championship. And Andy, you know, to me, what proves Andy's greatness and his whole plan when he was here was, you know, be consistently good, basically, so the stars align 1 year and you make a run. And he never got it done here. And now he's out in Kansas City. He's got Patrick Mahomes, so he's got the cheat code now. But the fact that he's been so consistently good for so long, that speaks to his greatness more than the number of championships. But I know nobody's going to agree.
I know, covering the AFC Championship game and talking to the players on the Chiefs I've talked to and people in the organization just from, you know, that whole Super Bowl run last year. Their big thing was after they won the AFC Championship. Remember when we were done on Christmas? That seemed to be like their rally cry. Like, oh, we're done. We're done. You know, Kansas City Chiefs.
Jeff, you're right. That was their rallying cry all year.
That was everybody in the locker room said it. It was great, honestly.
When I covered the NBA, Jeff, I tried to sell this one. Larry Brown's the smartest basketball guy I think that has ever lived.
I love Larry Brown.
You know, he's got his issues, nomadic. He gets he likes to get he liked to get hop from place to place. He was never happy, blah blah blah. I from every basketball person I've ever talked to, they just are in awe of the guy. And I once wrote a column that Larry Brown's a better coach than Phil Jackson, and it's not particularly close. Nobody gets that. Nobody gets that. But he is.
He wins with less. He didn't need
does,
Michael Jordan. Didn't need Michael Jordan, Sky Pippen, Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, whoever.
He does more with what he has. And that's the definition of coaching. A lot of people could have won. And I'm not saying Phil's a bad coach, and he got to a position.
Phil's a great coach. It's just, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. With
he got in a position to pick and choose where he wanted to go. And he's a very smart guy. And that's part of it as well. And after having all the success with maybe the greatest player of all time, or certainly the greatest player of his generation, then he could pick and choose and go win a bunch of more titles, because he was saying, hey, let's go play with Shaq and Kobe.
And I can coach Kobe because Kobe has the same mentality as Michael.
Yeah. But if you ask basketball people, it's not even a conversation. And that's what I think people don't understand about coaching. It's not about how many wins you have. It's about making the players you do have better and making the group better.
Vic Fangio said best. Great players.
Yeah.
Guys, let's fast forward real quick. Let's go to 2025. It's June 10th of 2025. This time next year. Is Nick Sirianni going to be the head coach of the football team? And if he is, what did he do in the 2024 season to secure that job for you next year?
I'll start. I'll say the Eagles reach the conference championship game and he'll be back.
I think he'll be back if they reach the conference championship game. I would lean towards at this stage. I don't like the way this is unfolding. If you're asking me to predict now,
I am. That's what I'm asking.
This is it. I think he's a lame duck. I think it's a horrible situation. I've said that from day one. Now the quarterback is not tethered to the coach, and the quarterback makes $255 million, and they're not going to take the coach over the quarterback. Yeah, I don't like it. I don't like the way it.
If you look at Eagles history with Jeffrey Lurie outside of Andy Reid, coaches don't last long here. But I mean, you could say that around the NFL, but coaches don't have a long shelf life here.
In a lot of ways, I think Jeffrey Lurie has set him up to fail.
I don't think this is like a 98, 2015, 2020 Eagles situation, because I think this team will win, but I've seen this story before and I know how it ends.
I mean, we talk about expectations. I have expectations. Everybody in the chat has expectations. Jeff Kerr, you have expectations. John McMullen probably has some level of expectations. The only one that matters is Jeffrey Lurie. I mean, what are his expectations for this team? He kept Nick. He allowed Howie to continue to be aggressive. Howie had a crazy offseason of extending players. He shelled out nearly $500 million.
I think Howie had a tremendous offseason.
I do too, but he, with that, what does Jeffrey Lurie need to see this year in order for him to remain confident in the head coach? I think it's a lot. I think it's a highly successful year, and Nick is gone.
John, do you think the leadership committee on this team, Hurts, Brown, Lane, BG, Slay, I'll add Saquon into this. Do you think that can mask anything that could be an issue with Nick?
No. I mean, I don't think leadership is a problem with Nick.
I don't think leadership's a problem in this locker room either. I know some people will probably disagree with me on that, but
yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it's just not a good setup, because you're trying to service two masters from Jeffrey Lurie's perspective, and say basically what Zander said. He didn't want to fire him because it would be a bad look, and he kept him with reduced power. And I'm not even sure. Look, Nick could have went down the Doug Peterson route and said, no, but he didn't want to do that.
Let's keep his job.
Yeah, and he has more of a political layer of him, and he could see the lay of the land, and he understood he had to make changes.
But Doug also had the biggest ace in the hole. Well, I won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, you're only one ever. And I did it with a backup quarterback against the greatest coach quarterback combination in the history of football.
Well, I would argue Jeffrey and Howie think they're more responsible.
Which is a joke. Do you think two guys wearing a suit are more responsible?
Well, I'll just say this in
I
Jacksonville.
don't.
I'm not saying you. I'm just saying. I'm just speaking.
I'll just say this in Jacksonville, and this is in Jacksonville right now with Doug. There are questions of why Doug Peterson is so married to Russ Taylor.
Yeah, it is weird. I will say that's a separate.
I mean, there's been talks in the organization about this. Like, they're like, oh, okay, Doug, we like you a lot. We want you to be here, but just so you know, we're not too pleased with how this guy is developing Trevor Lawrence right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're going to take Trevor Lawrence over Doug Peterson, and the Eagles are going to take Jalen Hurts over Nick Sirianni. That's just the way the NFL works. That's not unique at all. So that's my concern about not being, at least Doug is still, firmly entrenched with Trevor Lawrence. So if Trevor has a bounce back season, not that he played poorly, but he played poorly down the stretch. But if he gets going to where people think he should be, Doug's going to be fine. If he doesn't, he's not going to be fine. But they're connected together. Nick is no longer connected with Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, and that's the difference. Like, Trevor Lawrence believes in Doug, and Doug believes in Trevor, and the Jaguars believe in both of them. They just changed around the whole roster to basically help them to make sure that collapse doesn't happen again. Yeah, you're right, John. That's where the point comes across. It's where's the connection between Nick and Jalen.
And I'll say, assistant coaches, that's been a big thing as well, because this is no matter how many times I say Nick hires these assistant coaches, nobody believes me. You should believe Bobby King, because I don't think Bobby King has ever lied a day in his life. Because I don't think he cares enough to lie. And he was asked flat out, "How'd you end up here?" And the loquacious Bobby King said, "The head coach called me, interviewed, and got the job. There was no other connection. Nope. The head coach. That was it. End of story."
Believe it or not, the head coach does hire his assistants.
Yeah.
I'm not sure Nick hired Kellen. I want to believe he did.
He did. He did. He did. Now there's two. See, this is the part where, and sorry, we're keeping you late at Jeff Durr.
I'm off today, John. Keep me as long as you want.
Appreciate it, Jeff.
Good to hear. Appreciate it, Jeff. CBSSports.com. That's the political nature of it. No, to me, they're two different questions. If we're up to Nick and he knew that he could be the offensive leader, so to speak, no, I don't think he would have hired him. But he knew he had to hire somebody, and he hired Kellen Moore. Now, I also think he probably would have hired Cliff Kingsbury if Cliff was amendable to keeping all of Nick's guys. All of Nick's guys are still here.
Yeah. The only guy Kellen brought was Doug Nussmeier.
Yeah. So, did he hire Kellen Moore? Yes. Did he want to hire Kellen Moore? If you got the true serum in him, probably not.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to do it. But he knew that if he walked into Jeffrey Lurie's office and said, "You know what? We're going to fix this thing. I'm great. Brian's great. Alex Tanny's great."
Kingsbury thought Brian Johnson was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a valid explanation, but I will say if I interviewed for a job with somebody, or if I interviewed for a job and one of the other guys that was also interviewed for the exact same job, I had the chance to hire him and take away some of my role for that same job I was hired for, that would give me some agita.
Yeah, Zander, it happens everywhere. It's never the guy you want. Let's just put it that way. But it's the guy you're getting.
Yeah, you're right, Jeff. I don't know, guys. This is, I hope I'm wrong, but this to me seems like one of those problems that could impede the entire team, regardless of how good the offense is, regardless of how much players there is, how much talent there is, regardless of what Vic Fangio does. I mean, if Nick Sirianni doesn't have control of his football team, how far is the team going to go? I don't see it. I hope I'm wrong. I hope they can have great success
this year if he has control of this football team.
Yeah, we will. We certainly will.
Well, I think the biggest thing, the biggest thing will be if the offense struggles, and what does Nick do?
Well, evidently, it's going to be on Kellen Moore now.
I don't think it is. And again, it's all dependent on expectations. I think this offense is too talented to drop out of being a top 10 offense. That's, to me, is the floor.
Yeah,
but everybody expects them to be the greatest show on turf, and I don't think they're going to be that. So when people start criticizing Kellen Moore, and it's coming, be prepared for it.
You know when the Eagles will be considered the greatest show on turf? When they decide to give Paris Campbell and John Ross the football, because we know we're going to have people complain about that. Why aren't they getting the football this year?
Why aren't they getting the football?
Why is Quez Watkins getting the football? No, I don't want him to touch the football. There's one ball, boys.
Yeah. Why isn't Saquon Barkley getting the football in the passing game? That's coming.
I can't wait for that. I honestly can't wait to hear how big of a disappointment Saquon is all season long. By the way, guys, Rob Thompson's a terrible manager? Did you guys ever hear this one?
Don't they have the best record in baseball?
Yeah, I had to hear it all day yesterday. I'm like, did you just start watching the Phillies yesterday? Oh, he does the same stuff.
I was surprised you weren't in London. I got to be honest. I was surprised you weren't in London.
I was too busy hanging out with John McMullen all week to be in London.
There you go.
Yeah, where would you rather be? Yeah, London.
I always want to be a people pleaser.
London, or mini camp at the Novacare.
I was gonna tweet it, and I didn't because I do have respect for Passyunk Avenue Bar in London. To me, it is so stupid to go to London and hang out in a Philly theme bar. It is like, if I'm going to London, I'm seeing London. I don't want to see Philadelphia. I can see it here.
Jeff,
I'm still
with you on that.
Fair point.
There's probably many people who are not with you on that. Even the guy who cuts my hair, I talked to him. He's a barber. He listens to JAKIB. He's a big Eagles guy, big sports fan. Everywhere he goes on a road trip every year. Everywhere he goes, he finds the Eagles bar. Whether it's L.A., he went to the international game they played in a couple years ago. I'm like, really? Is that what you want to do when you go out there? But he loves it, and I'm like, look, to each his own. Do what you got to do.
There's a place in Myrtle Beach. I used to go to Myrtle Beach every year. There's a place in Myrtle Beach that makes really good Philly cheesesteaks. And, I'm not saying they're the best or anything like that, but everybody goes, why don't we go there to eat one night? I'm like, I don't want a cheesesteak. I can eat cheesesteaks every day of my life here. I don't need to go eat one.
I'm with you.
Myrtle Beach.
It makes no sense. Yeah.
I like to be I like to experience different cultures. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, if you're traveling, you might. That's, to me, that's the big excitement of it, to go see something different. Yeah, I'm with you 100% on that.
To go to a Philly bar in London is like going to New York and eating a Sbarro pizza.
Yeah,
not happening.
I'm with you, Jeff Kerr. It's goofy. Make sure everybody follows Jeff on Twitter and X at Jeff Kerr CBS. Does great work. Does great job covering even a little bit of Phillies, Eagles, NFL, and just does great work for CBS. So make sure you follow him on Twitter. Read all his work at CBS. Jeff, thanks for spending the extended time with us today, man. We appreciate you joining the show.
Yeah, boys. Thanks.
Thanks, bud.
There's Jeff Kerr, and I leave that conversation more concerned about Nick than when I started the show. And I got to be honest, it's not like I was feeling good about Nick. I mean, I was not in a good spot. I thought Nick was one of my biggest concerns. And now it's now it's exaggerated because, John, you're the voice of reason to me. I listen to Dan Sileo, who's, overwhelmingly one way. I read Eagles Twitter, who's, tends to be one way. You're my voice of reason. If you're telling me I got to be worried about Nick Sirianni more than I'm even thinking, I'm concerned. I don't know how far the team can go if that's the case.
Well, I don't understand the path. I don't understand it. So maybe I'm wrong, but if I were Jeffrey Lurie and I don't have a $7.5 billion asset. To me, there's two clear paths. Either you trust the guy and let him be the head coach, or you don't and you move on and get somebody else to be the head coach. That's it. That's the decision I'm making. And ultimately, I would have kept Nick Sirianni because of his larger record and what we talked about, and what he's been able to accomplish at the head coach. I would have given him one more chance. And then if it's another disappointing season, then you probably move on. I said the same thing about Doug Peterson. And even more so Doug, because he did win the Super Bowl, probably earned the right to have that one mulligan and try to get back. Because remember, that was a bad season. No question about it. The COVID season, but there was a lot of extenuating circumstances. I think people forget they made the playoffs in 2018 and they had a little decent run. They made the playoffs in 2019. He earned the right to have one more chance. That's always been, and I'm a continuity guy. So I'm always going to lean more toward continuity because you're starting over at some point. You're going to have some growing pains if you change coaches. So that's where I was. And he tried to straddle the fence. And I never think that's a good idea. But now, and maybe I'm reading too much into Jalen's, but I know Jalen well enough he's very, that's the word of the day, intentional. Nick talked about being intentional with his relationship. Jalen's very intentional. When I asked him that question, he wanted it out there that people knew this is basically a completely new offense and there's going to be some growing pains. He did that on purpose.
Yeah, which in its own way is a little bit of a shot at Nick based on what Nick said prior to Jalen at other press conferences.
Well, and Jalen's not listening either. He's just talking.
No, but I think, I don't know. To me, that was intentional again. That before the Nick Sirianni comments does allude to a certain point that Jalen is trying to make.
Yeah, I don't think they're on the same page is the problem. And when you're not on the same page as your quarterback, you got problems. Because they're going to choose the quarterback unless the quarterback's terrible.
Well, the quarterback's cap hits $100 million if they move on from him next year. They're not moving Jalen Hurts. I don't care what. They could go 1-16 this year. They're not moving on from Jalen Hurts.
Well, they might if they're 1-16.
I don't know. $100 million dead cap hit, Johnny.
Well, Jeffrey's what does he care at this point? But yeah, they're going to be a good team. It's just a matter. But the expectations are what the expectations are, and everybody thinks, everybody thinks they're a Super Bowl contender. And by everybody, I mean Eagles fans, bunch of national media people, Howie Roseman, Jeffrey Lurie. They think they're a Super Bowl contender. Those are the expectations. They don't reach those expectations. The layer of scapegoating has already been removed, so the clock has started on Nick Sirianni. There are no more buffers for not reaching expectations.
The relationship between Jalen and Nick. If let's just assume it's all Kellen's offense. Does it
matters
matter
a lot? That's my concern.
Right?
Yeah, it matters immensely.
I agree, but you do
franchise quarterback and the head coach. Even at the end of Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, that was the whole thing. They couldn't stand each other anymore. And
but even then, they respected each other. They might not have liked each other. They might have been oil and water together. But I think they respected each other because they knew the other one was there to help them win. And eventually it did burn out. But for the duration that it worked, I don't even know if they ever liked each other. I don't think like would be the right word. I think they respected each other.
Well, yeah, I don't. It's not about like. Yeah.
It's not about like at all. But I'm sensing a disrespect, not disrespect intentionally, but I don't believe Jalen believes in Nick Sirianni at all.
I don't think it has anything to do with disrespect or anything of that nature. I think he's been removed from the equation and I don't think any longer, it was confirmed by himself. He was removed from the equation with Jalen Hurts, essentially. Not that he's never going to talk to him again, but as he
He's not part of the
explained,
offense.
yeah, he was with him every day, every moment. It was him and Jalen Hurts, as most teams are when you have that setup, offensive head coach, quarterback. They're tethered together, and they are no longer tethered together.
Let's go to a commercial break. Before I do that, I'd like to hear from the chat on this. So if you guys, during the break, I'm going to read all the replies. If you guys could drop me, let's go 1 through 10, your level of concern with Nick Sirianni. I'd like to hear what you guys think. If I'm crazy sitting up here, if I'm listening to John, I'm like, I don't know how this team is going to work with Nick Sirianni. But what's your guys' level of concern in the chat for Nick Sirianni? Basement show enough, James. Just drop me a 1 through 10, on 10 being most concerned, 1 being Nick took us to a Super Bowl. I'm not worried about him, which is perfectly fine if that's your answer too. But we'll take a commercial break. Leave those responses in the chat for me. I appreciate that. Let's get to a commercial break. One more segment to go here on Birds 365. I want to talk about the pressure going into 24, but we're not going to include Nick Sirianni because we beat that to a pulp today. So I'm going to let that go after the break. So stay tuned on Birds 365. We'll be right back.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.
Field of life, First Trust Bank is there for you.
Champions on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Because Philadelphia dreams deserve a Philadelphia bank.
Heading down the shore. Have a ball once more.
Here, imaginations run wild and time stands still. Because here, you can find the best of the Jersey Shore, all on one 5-mile island. So leave the old you behind and get lost in the woods.
Wild, wild, wildwood days.
Plan your stay in the Wildwoods today.
Hi, I'm Jim Muehlbronner, Managing Partner at Del Valle Insurance Group. Give us a call. We're a local, knowledgeable agency, not an 800 number. Go Birds!
The greatest fans on earth. It's a bold statement, but would you expect anything less from Philadelphia? 58 years of heartache creates a toughness, a grit, a resolve not found in most. Sure, our prayers were answered, but now that we've had a taste, we're looking for more. Pondley Hockey, official partner of the Philadelphia Eagles.
EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome back in, everybody. A Monday edition of Birds 365. Back here, just talked to Jeff Kerr from CBS Sports. Had a good hour with Jeff where we broke into everything. This Hurts Sirianni stuff is interesting. I appreciate everybody's comments in the chat about it. Seems to be a mixed bag. A lot of people saying 7s and 8s, and then there's also some people saying it's overblown. Bob Lazar makes some good points about Kellen Moore and his offenses in the past. So somebody calling him the coffee coach, which is just hilarious to me. But we will continue. John, I want to go back to an interview we had last week. It was actually a week ago today. It was last Monday, and it was with the Philadelphia Inquirer's Marcus Hayes. And he brought up some things that me and you have not talked about before that, and really not many people are talking about it in the city, about Howie Roseman. Do you think there's pressure going into this season on namely Howie Roseman? Like, let's just say the worst case scenario of what we just talked about plays out. Nick is gone. Kellen's offense isn't great, so he's gone too. Is Howie in trouble, or is there? And do you buy into that? 'Cause I do think the one thing about Marcus Hayes that I really like, he might say some stuff that not you specifically, just for the sake of the story, he might say some stuff that people strongly or vehemently disagree with. He has good backing to each thing he says. He has a reason why he says something, and he articulates it very well. Some of the things he said made a lot of sense to me. What did you make of? Where do you stand on where Howie Roseman is?
I think Howie's fine. But where Marcus is correct, look, a lot of people assume Howie's got a lifetime job. He doesn't have a lifetime job. Now, Howie balks at that, by the way. He doesn't like when people say that.
Yeah.
How I always describe it is he's got more rope than anybody basically else as a GM in the NFL, and he's got more opportunity to make mistakes. But that doesn't mean if he makes continuous mistakes that Jeffrey won't move on. He already did once. He picked Chip Kelly over Howie Roseman. Now, granted, he kept him in the organization. He gave him a raise. He gave him a different title. But from Howie's perspective, it was a demotion because he took away what he loved, and that's personnel and that part of the job. So he already did it once. So why can't he do it again? And then the second part, he also did it with Joe Banner, who was even closer to him than Howie Roseman was. Now, in Joe's case, Joe also partially wanted to get a piece of the team eventually, and that wasn't going to be an option here. So he went and did it somewhere else.
Well, Joe can do that now, evidently.
Yeah, now he can do it. Yeah.
Call up Jeff.
So anyway, he's done it twice. So he will do it. It's just that. And then Marcus brought up a bunch of things. Yes, if Hassan Reddick turns into the defensive player of the year with the Jets, that's not going to look good on Howie Roseman. If Quinyon Mitchell doesn't develop. Now, where Marcus and I part paths drastically, he seems to think Jalen Carter was underwhelming.
Yeah,
and Jordan Davis isn't a good player. Jalen Carter was runner-up for Defensive Rookie of the Year. I mean, all right, he didn't win it. He should have won it. He would have won it. He certainly for the first half of the season, and he fell apart down the stretch, but he was still number 2. And you could still argue he's better than Will Anderson.
Yeah, and I think he was too. And I'm a Will Anderson guy. I'm a Bama guy. I'm a Will Anderson guy. I think Jalen Carter was. So I agree with you in that. Here's the thing I struggle with on Howie, right? Because Ben brings up a great point here. He said, how could Howie be in trouble when he's done his job? This is the most talented team in the NFL. Or if you don't want to call him the most talented, one of the top 5 talented teams, I would say, in the NFL. That's Howie's job, is to build the roster. It's not to go play games. It's not to go take snaps. It's not to go coach the team. So from that perspective, I get it. But across the NFL, you see a lot of GMs who are kind of tied to their head coach in a way, not always to the hip. Sometimes you'll see changes in coaches or a GM without the other vice versa being changed. But Howie's been through a lot of coaches now. I mean, if he goes through Nick too, it's going to be another new coach for Howie. I just do wonder if, like you said, there's a
Yeah,
shelf.
but Howie's never gone through a coach. And by that, I mean, yeah, people talk about it all the time. General managers typically don't get to hire as many coaches as Howie Roseman has gotten to hire. If you assume Howie Roseman hired them.
And he's not in Philly.
Jeffrey Lurie makes the decisions on the head coaches, both hiring and firing. So that to me is out of the equation, so to speak. Is he involved? Sure. But, he recommended Josh McDaniels. Howie, Jeffrey said, thanks for the recommendation. We're not going to do that. And by the way, Jeffrey was right. So, yeah, I mean, I get that argument because, national people who don't understand how things work, or even local people who don't understand how Jeffrey runs things, will say things like that and say, well, the GM doesn't get the, well, he hasn't hired one coach because Jeffrey Lurie has hired every single one of them. And that's his right. I mean, look, it's his team.
I know he's allowed to do it, but John, is it the right setup? Because Flexen makes a good point here. He says, then why is he involved in coaching and game plan decisions, Zander? Talking about Howie Roseman. And I think Howie probably is involved in some of that because of Jeffrey Lurie.
He's not involved in game plan decisions. Never has Howie Roseman been involved with game
picks the 53
planning
for game day? Or 46, whatever it is.
There was some speculation that Howie did during the Doug Peterson era. He picks the 53-man roster. That's his job.
So he's saying, though, to Nick, who's playing on Sunday. What if Nick, wants to put a guy in for a different reason?
Look at it this way. If we were telling Nick who to play on Sunday, why wasn't Nolan Smith playing more? No, he doesn't. He's not involved with game planning. That comes from a stupid offhanded comment from Jonathan Gannon, who I went back to and gave him the opportunity to correct it, and he corrected it. Howie Roseman is not involved with any game planning, nor has he ever been involved with any game planning, with any coaching staff, with any coordinator at any time. He picks the 53-man roster. That's his job as the GM. And then it's handed off to the coaching staff. And the coaching staff, believe me, and how we expressed this at the combine, I believe it was. It might have been the meetings, one or the other, when he was talking about Nolan Smith and wishing Nolan Smith would have played a little bit more last year. Well, he didn't because the coaching staff didn't want. And I mentioned that disconnect because I think it was at the combine now that I'm talking about it, because Howie talked first and then Nick came up. And Howie made those Nolan Smith comments. Yeah. And then Nick said, I'm trying to win a game. I'm playing to win a game.
Yeah. I'm coaching for my job. I'm coaching to win football games here.
Yeah. So they said it plainly to you. And again, it's amazing because Jonathan misspoke and corrected it, but people latch on to the misspoke and ignore the correction. Howie Roseman, if you think the Eagles won 29 of 32 games with Howie Roseman and being involved in game planning, come on. I can't help you if you think that.
It's good clarity from John McMullen, a good inside look there. John, thanks for clarifying that from your perspective. But let's real quick just go back to Lurie. I know it's his toy. I know it's his team. I don't own a $7.5 billion asset. I can't tell the guy what to do. But I can make an opinion on whether it's right. Do you believe it's right to do the way Lurie does? Because I do think he's involved. I do think, and it's okay. Like you said, it is his team. He can do whatever the hell he wants. But we're here to report on the team. We're here to judge their success. Do you think it's hindering success the way Lurie handles the team?
No, for the most part, no. Is everybody perfect? I say all the time, he's been a great owner. Large sample size. He's been one of the best owners in the NFL. Certainly a tremendous owner here. If you look at the prior history of the Eagles. Is he perfect? No. But I mean, his record of hiring head coaches is pretty damn good. At times, I don't think he has enough patience, Andy being the exception. And even then, the shelf life was probably over. So even though Andy probably would have gotten it corrected, I get why they had to move on. Chip was a mistake, and he understands that was probably the biggest mistake of his ownership. But he wasn't a bad coach. He won 10 games. He made the playoffs. He won 10 games twice, made the playoffs. Before it fell off, his biggest mistake was giving him total control over personnel. Obviously, Doug was a good hire, won a Super Bowl. Nick was a good hire, got to a Super Bowl. So he's been solid when it comes to hiring head coaches. Then you got to get out of the way. You don't have the expertise to hire Bobby King, and if you do, if you think you do, you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and he generally gets out of the way. But then you have the bad parts, which is, if you go back to Doug Peterson, the assumption that you need, and people hate this term when I use it at the NovaCare complex, scapegoat. When you need, and whatever you want to call it, use a different adjective. I don't care. But when somebody's got to pay for your perceived expectations, like you mentioned, the commenter said they have the most talent in the NFL. No, they don't. They're in the conversation. They're top 5. They got a lot of depth issues. They got a good starting 22 on paper. But those are the expectations. So if they don't live up, this particular person thinks they have the most talent in the NFL. It's going to be tough to live up to that expectation. And do you need a scapegoat if that doesn't happen? Because prepare, get your list ready. Because they don't have the most talent in the NFL. They have a lot of talent. They're certainly in a better position than most teams. But the scapegoating has been an issue when you don't live up to perhaps inflated expectations or unrealistic expectations. And that's not good. But overall, if you're looking at the entire picture, it's one of the best owners in the NFL. Easily.
Even if that comes with potential meddling that leaves you in situations where you fire a Super
there's
Bowl head
no
coach.
such thing as meddling when you own the team. You can do whatever you want by definition. The problem is when you think you know more than you do. Like Jerry Jones is probably the best example of this. The smarter owners hire talented people and let them do their job. For the most part, Jeffrey lets Howie Roseman do his job. Lets Nick Sirianni do his job. For the most part. And occasionally when those expectations aren't met, he steps in and says, you have to do this, or makes it implicitly clear, as it was this offseason, that, hey, something's got to change. And if something doesn't change, somebody's going to pay for it.
Yep, I agree. That's a good breakdown there. Let's go to James Carver. James Carver, 1999 Super Chat. Thank you, brother. We appreciate your support of the show and everybody in the chat. A lot of great responses. This is an interesting topic. I know. And a lot of you guys are giving great insight, so I appreciate everybody in the chat. James Carver says, devil's advocate for Jeffrey. The 95% is overblown. A lot of it is likely verbiage. Like Acho said, lines on page are limited. It's more like 32 ways to say hello, etc. With offensive coordinator systems, and struggles are like trying to become fluent. I agree. I do wonder how much of it is a similar offense that has different verbiage and different words and different titles and all those things because of a new offensive coordinator. And that's what Jalen's talking about. I don't know. I do agree with James's point, though.
Well, Jalen's 95%. Yeah, I assume that's what he's talking about. Yeah, I mean, you'll also hear guys say football is football. You'll hear it all the time. Like when we talk about, especially defensive football, even more so. Cover three is cover three. They can call it cover nine, maybe cover
Right.
three. Quarters is quarters. Coverage is coverage. There's only so many coverages you can throw out there. Occasionally, somebody comes up with a new one, and then everybody copies that. Everybody copies everybody. So offensively, yeah, a lot of it, everybody, Sean McVay's the guy now. So when everybody wants motion and bunch formations, it all basically, Kyle Shanahan as well. But so those two guys are sort of running the ship when it comes to offense in the NFL. And Sean calls it the illusion of complexity. You know who used that defensively here? Christian Parker said the same thing. Illusion of complexity. He said when he was talking about coverage, that's what you're trying to do. So yes, football's football. A lot of the stuff is overlapped. A lot of it is terminology and verbiage, but it's not easy when you're calling something for a long period of time, and all of a sudden somebody else comes in and calls it differently. That's honestly one criticism I've had of coaches. Why can't you change the verbiage? In other words, if you're coming into a situation, and this is not the best example, but if you're coming into a situation where they've had this same structure for 5 to 10 years and you want to change the terminology of something they've been using, why can't you? It's easier for you to change to that terminology. And too many coaches don't do that. And they force all the players to learn, which to me makes no sense.
Yeah, it's almost like an ego thing. Is it an ego thing
Yeah,
or what?
pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. It's exactly an ego thing. And that part, but from the standpoint of, yes, a lot of it is verbiage and terminology. Because everybody has core plays, what the running game, as Jason Kelsey said on his podcast, he hasn't looked at a playbook in 10 years. But he's a freaking offensive lineman. He's running inside zone, outside zone. All right, let's go. So yeah, a lot of it is overlapping in the same. And the 95% is probably a relation to the terminology and the verbiage.
So we had a good show today where we recapped all. Well, first we started off recapping our final touches on what we learned from minicamp week, winners, losers, any key takeaways, which was good. But then we got into this long rabbit hole of Jalen and Nick, and everybody's talking about it because Jalen said some wild stuff. If it does turn out to be not wild stuff, but he didn't.
Was pauses, wild pauses.
Yeah, he didn't
basically.
He
wasn't
back his
saying
coach
anything.
at all. So
yeah.
But to wrap it up, the question I asked you after the break: if this does not turn out good, Howie's not going anywhere, right?
No. Howie would need multiple bad seasons.
To be clear, I have no interest.
And he would need failures from Quinyon Mitchell and Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis which ain't going to happen. I mean, Jalen Carter's already proven himself. Again, that's where Marcus and I part paths. He's already proven himself to be a good NFL player. Is he going to reach his potential? That's a different conversation. Same thing with
I would
Jordan
almost
Davis.
go the other way. I think Jalen's going to turn out to be one of Howie's greatest draft picks.
Well, he's got the talent.
Certainly,
and Jordan Davis, it's not my fault people don't understand Jordan Davis's role.
No, I know, but he doesn't bring even if he does live up to his full potential, he doesn't bring the same level of accolade.
No, the splash. He doesn't bring the splash.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody, I can tell you this, nobody at the NovaCare complex. Do they want him in better shape, better condition? Yeah, it's been a theme all off season here. Nobody looks at Jordan Davis and says that guy's a bust. That's completely outside the walls of the NovaCare complex. And Quinyon Mitchell hasn't even played a game yet, so I'm not worried about him being a bust. But if you have too many first-round busts, and it's not the case because, again, Jalen Carter, if you want to go back to Devontae Smith, is doing pretty well. Jordan Davis, they're fine with. And I'm sure Quinyon will be fine as well. But we got to see him play first. Yeah, Howie's in no peril whatsoever.
Yeah. Nolan, I think, would be probably his biggest first round.
Yeah,
question
Nolan.
right now.
Nolan. I forgot about Nolan because you know, Jalen obviously.
Yeah, everybody kind of forgets about Nolan. Kind of flies under the
Well,
radar.
part of the problem is people forget about Nolan because Nolan's got to step up.
Yeah, so we'll see about Nolan Smith stepping up. Johnny Mac, that about concludes what I had to talk about on today's show. I just I guess we can finish up on what Nick said or what Jalen said about Nick, just to circle back and put a bow on that.
Well, Jalen didn't say anything. That was the problem.
No, but it was the lack of what he said. It was the key ball question.
Nick, the concern for me, Nick confirmed basically that he's no longer, two peas in a pod with Jalen. And that concerns me. He didn't spin it as a bad thing. So that's completely my take on the situation. If you're an offensive head coach and you're not tied to the quarterback, everything better go well because they're not choosing the coach over the quarterback.
The other intentional thing about this, which is funny, is that Jalen says that when he knows he's about to be out of the building for 7 weeks. It's like here's something you guys can stew on for 7 or 8 weeks.
Thanks, Jalen. I appreciate it. Jalen's trying to help me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it from that perspective, but I will say the intentionality of the quarterback kind of makes me wonder. Like, I wonder how Nick feels about this right now. I know he wasn't asked directly about it because he was right after, but I wonder if he went back and listened to Jalen's comments and it's exactly what he expected him to say. I doubt that, but I don't know. I wonder where Nick's head is when it comes to the quarterback and the offense and all those things.
Yeah.
Is he embarrassed to show his face in the offensive rooms after he's been basically offensively castrated?
No. And as a matter of fact, he talked about sitting in different rooms and being able to do different things.
He talked a lot about sitting in defensive rooms. I've never known Nick to be a defensive guy. All of a sudden, he's got to talk to Bobby King and Clint.
Oh, it's interesting. I think one of the parts he's got less influence on defense as well.
Definitely. Not that
because
he had any previous.
he could. No, he did. He would step in. During the first year when they were struggling defensively, he stepped in and sort of made it clear to Jonathan what he wanted from a standpoint of, the reason they were playing the Fangio scheme to begin with is limit explosive plays, turnovers. That was the goal. That's what he wanted. I talk about all these coaches, Shanahan, McVay, Nick, LaFleur, all these young offensive coaches. They all wanted defensive coordinators who played the Fangio system because they looked at it from their perspective and said, all right, this gives us the most trouble. So I want to play this defensively. So that was his sort of mindset coming in as the head coach. He wanted that scheme in place. And obviously with Sean, same thing. But now with Vic, you even have less. It's, what are you going to tell Vic about his scheme? So there's no sort of avenue. So he's, that's kind of underreported.
You think 100% certain that, well, I guess nothing is 100% certain in the NFL, but are you leaning heavily toward that Nick is definitely the guy who moved on from Sean Desai midseason?
Yeah, 100%.
Like that didn't come from Lurie. That didn't come from Howie. That you don't think Lurie said this defense looks awful, get him out of there? Nothing.
100% Nick Sirianni. In fact, I think that's his biggest mistake.
Yeah. Well,
100%. And it's weird. And I think it has more to do with not being able to manage the players more than, scheme or anything of that nature. Presence, nebulous things like that. And, again, maybe it was tied to expectations because he started thinking about it when they were 8-1 at the bye week. And clearly, why are you thinking about it at 8-1? Well, clearly you don't believe this guy has the whatever you want to describe it as, the cachet, it's the word I always use, to be a defensive coordinator. And they were a hell of a lot better.
Wasn't that bad. I mean, it wasn't great, but
no, well, that's what I'm saying. I think people
shut
forget
down Miami pretty good, who dropped a 70 burger on somebody last year.
They had moments under Sean.
The
Tampa early in the season, the Rams game in the second half, Miami, as you mentioned. They had
you hear a lot about being able to relate to players, and like now it looks like Nick Sirianni is the one who can't relate to the players. So I don't know. It's a weird situation, the whole Sean Desai thing.
Yeah, it's a very weird situation. But your original question, did it have anything to do with Jeffrey or Howie? No. Nope.
Good to know.
And why? By the way, Jeffrey and Howie are probably like the same way. They were, do what you need to do, but they were probably questioning it themselves, if anything, because they probably thought the same. Well, we're 10-1, but it didn't work. Didn't work
at all. Yeah, it was a historic collapse thereafter. So no, it did not work. James Carver, final super chat of the day. Thanks everybody for being here. Wrapping up this edition of Birds 365, Monday, June 10th. Moving right along, everybody. We have a 6-7 week period, and then we'll be back on the field, and the season will be here before we know it. J-Mac, you know Jalen better than us. Could his pauses and responses be in part result of his own disappointment with his play and being unable to think beyond what he expected to be asked, i.e. struggles, etc.? It's a good point. I do think Jalen's probably another guy that's anybody that loves greatness like Jalen is self-critical. I mean, if you're a guy that expects of yourself, then you're critical of yourself. And that's what I would agree. Jalen falls in that category. John, any response to James Carver?
Well, I think his pauses with Nick were real. I think, because people ask me the question and I have to pause and try to explain, all right, well, what's Nick's role from a typical standpoint? Now, I can go into the enormity of the job, and I think a lot of the logistical stuff that people don't think about. And certainly players aren't going to think about it. So they're thinking about it from an X's and O's standpoint. And it's just what I said. Kellen's involved with the offense, and now he's even the underreported part of it is, Bick's got total control of the defense. And why would you want to question Vic Fangio? So, from a player standpoint, he was asked, all right, well, what's his role? And he's trying to come up with something in the moment, and he's not thinking about schedules or setting up practice or setting up road trips or all that kind of, as I said, logistical stuff. And you're probably thinking on the field. That's what I think happened with Jalen. I think it was a legitimate pause, and he's trying to come up with something in the moment. And he couldn't come up with something.
Yeah, I thought the smile and the brief chuckle were telling to me. I thought that was interesting. And the other thing Tavern Mike says, real quick, we'll get out of here in a second. Tavern Mike has a good point about, because this was my original takeaway before the whole, before I read into the Nick Sirianni thing and went back and listened to it. I think Jalen seemed frustrated with his progress picking up Moore's offense. That was my first takeaway. Like the 95% thing wasn't a reflection of Nick. It was more a reflection of he knew everybody was saying the offense looked bad. He didn't feel great out there. And maybe that was a little bit of a self-serving, hey guys, this is 95% new, we're going to need some time. And that was my first takeaway, but we'll see.
Well, yeah, I think the 95%, that was clearly did an effort to explain some of the struggles of the offense in the spring.
But it was also a little bit of a shot at what Nick said. And like you said, he might not have heard what Nick said, but before that 95% comment, one of our biggest topics on Birds 365 was, how is the offense going to work with a meshed offense? Because Kellen Moore used that terminology as well. Yeah.
And by the way, I've said I think that's good as well, because I never thought a meshed offense would work. I think, again, I've said from the start, either you let Nick keep his offense and run it the way he wants, or you have Kellen Moore run the offense, and he shouldn't be said, oh, you shouldn't say, we did this well, so it's got to be in there, to Kellen Moore. And I think I've said pretty consistently, that should be something that evolves on its own. If Kellen Moore's what you think he is as an offensive coordinator, and you did something well, he will integrate it into the offense by himself. He doesn't need decrees.
Right, because that's what a good offensive coordinator would do. Yeah.
Yes. He doesn't need decrees. So I think it's a good thing that it's all Kellen Moore's offense. The question is it a better thing than keeping it with Nick Sirianni's offense? I think it's certainly a better thing than trying to mesh the two together.
Yep, I agree with that. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. Boy, John, I hope I know Bill Colarulo got married last week. Shout out to you, Bill. Congratulations. He was in Aruba.
Yeah. Still checking in with Andrew DeCecco.
Yeah, still checking in with DeCecco. But he, earlier in the offseason, he ranked the combination head coach quarterback, Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts, as the best head coach quarterback duo in the NFC. I'd love to talk to him about this. I hope he was able to at least see some of it or read some of it. So I'll check in with Bill and see if he's available to get back with us tomorrow. But boy, this was an interesting show today. It's interesting to hear from you and Jeff Kerr's perspective. I want to thank everybody for checking in today. Some really good comments. Ben Gunter, you were awesome today. Some great comments from you. James Carver, flexing and stepping. You're here all the time, man. We appreciate you. James Jones, Twiz the Jigga, as always, South Jersey. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Make sure you guys hit the like button. I think we're slacking way behind in the likes today. So let's get those likes up on your way out the door. We appreciate you being here. Johnny Mac, good show today. We will catch you tomorrow on Birds 365.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
You've been listening to Birds 365, the destination for the passionate Eagles football fan who bleeds green. If it's Eagles football, we're talking about it. Debate inside the locker room and guests that are some of the greatest football minds from around the region. We hope you enjoyed the show. We know we had a blast. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with us on social media at JAKIB Sports. See you next time on Birds 365.